Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the ISM-Rochester membership meeting. I'd like to bring it over to our president, Leanna, and she's going to be taking control of the meeting and then introduce our speaker.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for waiting. We had a few technical difficulties prior, but you know, the life of Zoom. So I'm glad you all were able to make it. Tonight is our first membership meeting of 2022, and we're so excited to have you all here. At our November membership meeting, the speaker was Lynne Wiklander, which I'm sure you all remember. Her topic was "You only have 90 seconds, an introduction to strategic communication." And tonight, Lynne is back with us, and she's going to be presenting on the follow-up topic called "After 90 Seconds, Strategic Communication Skills Part 2. So we're all excited to have her back and for her presentation on this topic. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Lynne.
All right. Thank you, Leanna. And thank you, Kathy, for your help. And hello, everybody. Welcome to 2022. Did we ever think we were actually going to get here? For those of you that were part of the presentation in November, thank you for coming back to hear part 2. And for those of you that weren't part of the presentation in November, there will be a very, very small amount of review from November, but then we'll pick up on the continuation for success in strategic communication. I hope all of you will feel free to ask some questions along the way. I believe we have a moderator in the background that's keeping an eye out for questions. But with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I am hoping that everything goes smoothly. So here we go with a screen share, and there you are. And we should be ready to rock and roll with this. So after 90 seconds, again, as a reminder from the November meeting, I gave you the dire warning that you don't have much time to settle down in order to be successful in presentations and communication. You have seconds to be your best every single time. Now, one of the focus topics for November's meeting had to do with items regarding the physicality of presentations and successful communication, the importance of using your voice well, of using body language well, of putting yourself at service to the audience. Because after all, if you as a presenter, and this is whether you're in a webinar or you're live, we hope to do more live presentations going forward, but as a presenter, the value that you bring to the audience is you and the way you present your content. If it was just about the content or just about the PowerPoint slides, what would we need you for? So that was a lot of the theming that we were talking about in the November meeting. But now we're going to go into the next level, and that is the content. And what does it really mean to develop strategic content for your presentations? And I'll remind you along the way that when I talk about success in communication, I'm talking about success in your life communication. The items that I'm talking about are not reserved exclusively for a business environment. They apply to that life that you have outside of your work environment. So please keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, again, as a reminder from the November meeting, when we talk about communication excellence, we're talking about something that is a package of skills that is learned and practiced and practiced and practiced. This is not a set of skills that people are just born with. There's no such thing as a natural, excellent communicator. There are people for which it comes a little bit easier than for other people, but the real pros, the individuals who are working at a world-class level, have learned a set of skills and have practiced those skills. But when it comes to communication in a business environment, clear communication is essential. It is not optional. And failure is not an option. That saying, although it didn't originate in the communications field, it should have, because in everything that you're doing in your business life, as well as in your personal life, but let's keep it on the business level, clear communication is an essential skill. Now, when you're clearly communicating, it brings 3 specific characteristics to mind for your audience, and that is that the audience understands the meaning behind what you are saying. There is clarity in the meaning. This is not necessarily a language issue. It's not about somebody being an absolutely exquisite speaker. It is that the audience gets understanding at the end of the day, and that they find you believable. They find you reliable. They trust you, and that they remember the right things. And I think one of the scariest statistics I brought up in November was, at the end of any presentation, I don't care if you're having a meeting for 15 minutes or if you're in a class that goes on for 2 days or something in between, the bottom line is that the audience will only actually remember 5% of what you said at the end of that meeting. Only 5%. That means you have to be extraordinarily specific and extraordinarily clear in what is important for the audience to remember. That is up to you, the speaker. Now, I also talked at the meeting in November, well, it was all the way last year, I talked about the need for leadership communication. And there were 5 characteristics that I brought up as being key to being leaders in communication. This does not have to do with your title or with your position on an organizational chart. This is you being a leader in whatever you're communicating. And that is, number 1, what I call executive presence. That means you own it. You own your topic. You are the most qualified person to present and communicate on your topic. Next, that what you're doing is compelling for the audience. This isn't about what you want to say. It's about what does the audience need to hear and how do they need to hear it. They need to hear it in an interesting way. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but just the fact that you're standing up in front of a group of people, or in the case of a webinar, have your face in a screen, doesn't make you compelling. You have to work at it. Next, staying out of the details, where the details can get in the way of the integrity of your communication. You can't be diving down to the molecular level when you may only have 5 minutes on the webinar or 10 minutes on the webinar. So you have to be very selective. You also have to be prepared to answer questions, and good preparation means that no question comes as a surprise. And finally, getting to the commitment, getting to the reason for your communication. Just passing across information isn't good enough. Most information can be passed in an email or in a white paper What you need to do is take it a step further to be convincing, compelling, persuasive to your audience and get to what you need. So those were some of the basics from the earlier program. Now let's take a look at what is strategic communication. What does that imply? Well, this is the pyramid of action, and as you see, it's upside down. And it goes, we have from the bottom, we have the leadership. And again, in this, I'm not talking about a position on an organizational chart. I'm talking about being the leader for a topic or for a presentation, whatever it is you're trying to communicate. And the pyramid of communication and action goes from the bottom up communication, so that you are encompassing the vision, the mission, and the strategy of the organization. You are respecting those, and you are conveying an understanding of those items as you go upward in the action pyramid through tactics, execution, and finally evaluation and analysis. So this is a continuous process, bottom-up strategic communication. Now, as we go forward from this, when we talk about strategic communication, we're talking about messages. And I'm going to put a very specific definition on the word messages, because you can't talk about strategic communications as if it's some kind of a cloud. It's not an amorphous thing out there. Strategic communication consists of you putting together a series of specific messages in order to get information conveyed and action taken when that information is delivered. In other words, what is a message? A message is a complete unit of information. That is a message. So you will have multiple messages in your communication. Now that's going to be, for most of you at this point, you're shaking your head and saying, tell me something I don't know. It's going to be multiple messages that may be asking a question, answering a question, or clarifying an item. But the other distinct part about the messaging, which is the basis of strategic communication, is that you then combine groups of focused messages to create a presentation, a communication activity that has a specific outcome. That is the key to strategic communication. Now, in order to be successful in strategic communication, there are many aspects to take into consideration. When I'm doing my normal programs, those that are my real life, my real job programs, strategic communication skills is a 2-day program. It's a 16-hour program. So you can imagine that I'm condensing somewhat in order to provide you with the highlights to successful strategic communication. So this is not a simple topic, not if you really wanted to work on behalf of your organization and for you and for your own career development. It's complicated, but absolutely learnable. And we're going to start with the high points of successful strategic communication. There are 3 items to keep in mind as you are thinking about the messaging that creates strategic communication. First, defining the tone. Now, what that means is that you, as the owner of this communication activity, you are setting the tone. You are setting the emotional tone of the specific communication activity. And this is important. It's important because if you don't set the tone, the audience will take on whatever tonality they feel like. And that means you may have one person who's the decision maker who decides that they're sad. You may have another person that feels like this is some kind of a joke. You may have another person who's very excited. You define the tone through your messaging, through the construction of your messaging. The second key to successful strategic messaging is understanding what position the audience is taking. Now, this does require you to be paying attention as you prepare your communication and as you're presenting your communication. And there are, of course, some special challenges when it comes to a webinar because you're not always going to have contact with your audience, but it is understanding the position of the audience. And then the third one is using the appropriate focus for your messages. Now, I suspect that up to this point, this is again sounding a little bit on the fuzzy side, but stay with me, because now we're going to start diving deeper into each of these pillars of successful strategic messaging. Now, I want to start by using the example of COVID messaging. And I'm not going to turn this into some kind of a political statement. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is that COVID right now is a very public example of just how difficult messaging can be. I hope that most of us can agree that COVID has been devastating on a global level, or at least inconvenient on a global level. And I hope nobody is offended by the tone that I'm taking. I'm not trying to be laissez-faire about it because for many, many millions of people, it has been terrible. But the messaging related to COVID globally has simply not been going well. And why is that? Because no one message is resonating with anybody. I don't care where you are in the world. The messages that on one level would appear to be perfectly obvious are simply not resonating. And they're not resonating, not because there is a failure of will to communicate well, but the individuals who are responsible for COVID communication have been working like crazy and yet not successfully, not 100% successfully in getting that magic formula of the tone and of the position and of the focus to line up so well that there is 100% uptake. in the different messages. So this right now, we're actually living in a really, really interesting time because the messaging question, the strategic messaging question of COVID is something that crosses all kinds of boundaries in ways that most questions don't. So I'd like to recommend that you think about that as we're going through this. If you don't have a specific question in mind regarding your business or a specific example regarding your personal life, but do think about the COVID messaging issues. And you've seen it. I mean, it's exploding in the media all the time, on the newspapers, in the blogging, on the social media, on media, television reports, wherever you look globally. The challenge of COVID messaging is in your face. Now, let's start out with what we call the presentation structure. Every presentation, and this is regardless of the length of the presentation or the complexity of the presentation, it's regardless of the media that you're using, regardless of the format, has 5 elements. The opening, which is to grab the attention of your audience. 3 key messages, that is 3 key strategic messages, and a closing, which is your call to action. It is at this level that you are identifying what I call the overarching tone of your presentation. And that means you can think of it as the emotion that you want the audience to feel as they are listening to your presentation. And I've listed on the side here some examples of different feelings that can be and are successfully used for all kinds of strategic messaging. You can, through your words, through your phrases, through your examples, generate enthusiasm. Or maybe you need your audience to be worried about something or anxious. Maybe you want them to be tremendously curious about something. Or maybe you need their audience to be engaged. So you decide what you want your audience to be feeling ahead of time, and then use that as a guidepost for the creating your messages. Now, 3 messages doesn't sound like very much, but these represent logical groups of information. Below each key message, you may have sub-messages. You may have multiple sub-messages. The thing is, everything within each of those circles goes together, hangs together. It is at this level that you can use variations in tone to keep your audience interested. And if you've been paying attention to while I've been speaking, I have varied the tone, and I'm not talking about tone of voice, but sometimes I'm saying something that I'm hoping will excite and enthuse you. Sometimes I'm saying something that I believe will worry you, or maybe even cause you some anxiety. So I change those little tones, I make those little tonal changes throughout the presentation, but the overarching tone remains the same. So your job, as you're thinking about a strategic communication responsibility, is to figure out what tone is going to be the most appropriate. Now, The next thing is about the audience. Now, audiences of all types, audiences can be divided into 3 unequal groups. And this is statistics. All right. This isn't an exact number, but this is a fact that you can use as you are speaking to any group of more than about 8 people. 8 people or more, this division of what we call audience positions is useful. So 3 unequal positions. And when I talk about their position, I'm talking about their point of view as they're walking in the door. The audiences can very simply, you can think of this as a pie chart. If you want, you can think of it as a scale, as a band. The first position is those individuals who are your angels. They are your allies before you have ever communicated anything. Maybe they're your friends. Maybe they're people that have worked on a common project with you. Maybe they are colleagues in a team, but they are your allies. In other words, they already agree with you. You have somebody who's cheering for you as you go into a communication situation. You can assume statistically that 15 to 20% of an audience is your ally or your angel walking in the door. Well, that's not so bad. The next is the lost souls. The lost souls. These are the individuals that are likely to disagree with you walking in the door before they've ever heard anything you've said. They are likely to disagree. And you've all met them. I've met them. You've met them. People who are the naysayers. You say the sky is blue, and they say you're probably going to get skin cancer. You say it's a beautiful snowy day, and they say my car is totally iced in. All right? Lost souls. The third group, and the lost souls represent statistically in any audience 20 to 25% of the audience. That's a pretty scary statistics. Walking in the door. The third group are the fence sitters, the undecided. These are the people that you have the greatest chance of influencing in a strategic communication activity. And you can see that the undecideds represent 55 to 70% of any audience. And again, this is statistically. Now, our tendency as human beings, our tendency is to want everybody to be on our side. That is unrealistic. That is an inappropriate goal, to think you are going to persuade everybody to be on your side when you are in a communication activity. That's the hard truth. Not pleasant, but the truth. However, the good news is you don't need everybody. You don't need everybody to be on your side to succeed in your communication, whatever that communication is trying to get done. You only need over 50%. And you need the right people. But the message here is, if you go into a meeting and your messaging is based on your belief that everybody is already on your side because it's perfectly obvious, you're going to lose. If you go into a meeting believing that everybody's against you, and you structure your messaging in that way, you're going to lose. You are compelled as professionals and as leaders in your strategic communication to take into consideration all three positions. And those three positions are reflected in the way you construct your messaging. Now, here I'm going to give you an example of using audience positioning in order to provide different strategic messages that are oriented to a common goal. The common goal I've selected, and again, I'm using something very, very neutral because I know you represent different industries, you represent different expertises, you represent different positions. So I'm trying to pick something neutral, but I said my goal in a specific, my imaginary specific communication activity, my goal is to gain the enthusiastic approval for a process change. All right, now, if I am talking to an ally, if I am trying to convey this goal, if I'm trying to get to this goal, and I know I'm speaking to somebody who is already an ally, here's what the message would look like. Your own investigations support this process change. You see, I'm saying thank you to that ally because they have already, I know already that they're in approval of this process change. Now, how does the message change if I'm speaking to a lost soul? If we're not prepared to make this change, we will disenfranchise our key customers. So I'm trying to find something that isn't criticizing the position that the lost soul may have. I'm not saying that they are a bad person or a bad team or a bad group or a bad leader, but I'm saying here's the risk. In my third example, which is a fence sitter, so this person is walking in the door and I don't have a feeling for whether they're going to approve this process change or not. This change may appear to be optional, but we must seriously consider what the costs may be of not making the change. All right. I hope that in this you can see how by having a single objective, that is to gain this group's approval for a process change, I have provided three different messages that are all oriented to getting their approval. All right, now, the third item, so we've talked now about the tonality, and we've talked about the position that the audience is in, the position that the audience has taken coming in the door. And remember, you don't have to have 100%, you just need a majority and having the right people in that majority to have this communication be effective. Now, next, This is a repeat from the November meeting. This is what we call Aristotle's Triangle. And Aristotle's Triangle represents the three key features of any successful communication activity. And this was a breakthrough 2,500 years ago, because Aristotle, who was a student of Socrates, said, Socrates, you don't know what you're talking about. Because Socrates implied that there were only two pillars to communication success. And Aristotle broke through, created the triangle, which we have in rhetoric, the art of argumentation or discussion, we have used as the baseline with very, very little modification for the last 2,500 years. So it's pretty well tested. And Aristotle's triangle has 3 points. The first point is the pathos. That is that as a speaker, you need to convey emotion in order to be listened to, respected as a rhetorician, as a speaker. You also must have credibility, the ethos. And that credibility is something that you establish and reinforce throughout the period of your presentation in order that the audience maintains their trust in you. And I have used this particular example many times. I was getting, this happened about 15 years ago. I was getting ready to go to a presentation that I had very, very much been looking forward to. It was the chief executive officer of the company that I was working for. I had been waiting to hear this individual speak, very anxious. It was an external event. It wasn't an internal event. So it was on a topic that was different than usual. And within 90 seconds, I was ready to walk out of the room because I went to that having such high expectations for the presentation. And that person totally undermined their credibility with me as a listener within 90 seconds. So it isn't about position. It isn't about title. It isn't about a fancy resume or a fancy education. All of those might get you in the door, but they won't keep the audience interested. You have to do that continuously. Again, in any strategic communication activity. The third element that we talk about is the need for facts. And of course, facts are important, but if you try to approach every case with just handfuls of facts, you are not going to be successful. Oh, and by the way, if any of you have ever heard the phrase, well, the data speaks for itself, the facts speak for themselves, that I have to tell you, that's one of the biggest lies ever, because no data ever spoke for itself. The data must have you to speak on its behalf. It must have you as the interpreter of the data, because data alone can't speak. So these are items that you need to have as a speaker. But they're human. That means that these same prejudices reside in your audience. And you, as a speaker, must be aware that certain individuals need the passionate argument. They need to hear your communication message, your strategic message, front-loaded with passion, with heart. Other people need to have the messages wrapped in credibility. And other people need to hear messages that are very fact or data heavy. That means in any audience, you must be prepared to create messaging that in some cases is heavy on passion, lots of heart, lots of caring. This is very people-oriented. And you may need to have messages that are very heavy on the credibility side. Where did you get this? Where did you get this data? What are the sources of this? Who peer reviewed this? Who said this? Who wrote this? And then some people need the fact. Now, the truth is, most people do need a mix of these as they are listening to different strategic messages. There are very few people that are so blinded that they only care about facts, or they only care about references, or they only care about the emotion. Most people need to hear all three pieces, but most people have a preferred type of loading in favor of the pathos, the ethos, or the logos. Most people, and if you're really, really good, what you need to figure out is when you're creating strategic messages that are going to involve decision makers, really heavy-duty decision makers, the more you know about their preferred type of messaging, the better you can front load your strategic communication with a type of messaging that they will best respond to. Now, this is what I call the audience focus. Where is their focus? Where is their attention as they're listening? What is it that tickles their ears, that gets and keeps their attention? So I'm going to now go through, like I did when it came to audience position. Now I'm going to go through, we're going to take a single message, an objective, and take a look at how the messaging changes depending on what is the focus of the audience. So here we go. Once again, same objective for my strategic communication activity: to get enthusiastic approval for some kind of a process change. If in this I am talking to people who need to hear the passion, the caring part of it, here's something I could say. By making a change to this process, we will have a safer work environment. Good for people, safer, nice thing. We care about their health and well-being. Heart, lots and lots of heart in that type of message. If we're talking to people who are more interested in the ethos and the credibility side, well, we have a number of peer-reviewed studies that have shown that this type of change will help to improve our current market position. improve on our current market position. Okay, peer-reviewed studies. This is credible stuff. You aren't just making it up as you go along. If you're talking to people that are data-oriented, they want the facts on this, what message could you give them? Again, always reflecting on what is your final objective. Well, error rates will decrease by 15% when we make this process change. There's a nice number, decrease of 15% and error or flaws of some kind. That could be interesting to somebody who's a data-oriented person. Now, as I started out with, I've been trying to give you kind of the appetizers of strategic communication success. And now I have just in 40 minutes given you 9 different dimensions to think about. And that's kind of a lot. And that's not the end. That isn't everything. But if you can use these 3 key items, the overall tonality that you're trying to achieve, understanding the starting position of the people you're speaking to, and having a feeling for what resonates with them in terms of the focus of your messages. If you can start to become comfortable working in just those dimensions, you will be well on your way to having successful strategic communication. And all along, what we're considering is, what does it take? What is the biggest picture of all in terms of being successful in strategic communication? To be clear in your communication. That means using language, using examples that are going to make sense to your audiences, as well as the very best in terms of your speaking and conveying that message. That you are concise. You are not getting lost in the weeds. You're not delivering more than needs to be delivered. You're delivering the right amount with the right qualities of messages to get the job done. And that you maintain your credibility all along the way, your personal credibility. That you are consistent, and that is consistent in your tonality, consistent in the way you're presenting information, so that the audience can relax, so that they can be comfortable, because everything we do is on behalf of the audience in order to get what we need. So that consistency is critical. And then finally, that you're telling a story that is compelling, that you're delivering it in a compelling way. And you put all of these together and you have the keystone for successful strategic communication. All right. And with that, Kathy and Leanna, I'm back off of my share screen. I can come off of my share screen here. And there we go. Were there any questions that came up? We didn't have so many people participating this time, but that's okay.
I don't see any questions. If anybody has a question, just put it in the chat or the Q&A, and then Lynn could answer it.
It looks like Lonnie just typed something, Kathy. If you would like to read it.
Oh, here it is. Hold on a second. Let me get in there.
Okay.
Hi, Lynn. Another stellar presentation in perfect timing since I have to show 2 to 3 new process improvements, changes to our merged agency in the next 1 to 2 months. How do
Wow.
you get, hold on a second. How do you get more than 5% retention? Of course, assuming we are using all our keystones.
Thank you, Lonnie. The thing about the 5%, I have the good news and the bad news. The bad news first, and that is it is almost impossible to get above the 5% level. But remember how I said that they will only remember 5% of what you said. The second part of that is they will remember a significantly higher proportion of how they felt. And it's that feeling, if you can capture and convey feelings, positive feelings, they don't need to remember more than 5%. They need to remember that they felt good, they felt confident, they felt positive, that they enjoyed the presentation, they learned something. I'm not sure what I learned, but I learned something. That's what you can really make a difference on. And that is part of this structuring using these strategic pillars that I've been talking about, these 9 dimensions that I threw up on the board. Appreciate the question.
Thank you. Thanks for answering that. If anybody else has a question for Lynn, please, please. I mean, I was taken away, it's a lot of your points, over November and then of course January. But once you start looking at other people's presentations, you sort of really grasp a lot of what you're saying.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, that's right, because it does. I think what this becomes is a wake-up call for people in terms of why do certain people's presentations work? Why does it seem like certain people always get what they want? Well, I'll tell you why. I mean, because they're doing a great job of thinking about these items when they're planning communication activities of any kind. And it helps you to learn what those are. You can put a dimension on it instead of just kind of thinking about it in the fog.
Definitely. Okay, I don't see any more. I don't see any more questions at this point. Did you have anything?
Yep, I was going to add a quick comment. Lynn, at our last board meeting and from a lot of the members, we received excellent feedback on the November meeting. So I wanted to give you that positive feedback. And I know we were all super excited for this meeting. And we do really appreciate all the time you spent on this. Thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Call me another time. I am lots of topics I can talk about. But it's been so nice to work with all of you and to meet you. And I wish you all the very best going into 2022 and beyond. Are you digging out in Rochester?
Yes, we are. At least I am. I don't know about everyone else.
Yeah, you're like, you got like what, like 18 inches or something?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I haven't seen a snowflake since the 28th of December.
Oh,
and I
my
live
gosh.
in Houston. Go figure.
No. Well, now it's supposed to be really cold. So it's like the snow and the cold all combined. It's always fun. So
right. We have to have a strategic meeting with the weather.
Yeah, right. Lonnie asked really quick, Kathy. Lonnie asked, everyone will get a copy of the presentation as well. Is that possible?
Yeah, you would mean like a PDF, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And plus the meeting is recorded, so you can also get a copy of the recorded meeting too to hear Lynn talk about the topics instead of just looking at the slides. So that's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, if Lynn if she gives permission for the slides, I'm sure she'll send them to Leanna and myself, and then I'll get it out to everybody. And of course, she'll get the recording. I probably won't get it posted till tomorrow sometime, but please share it with your colleagues, though.
Good.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye, Bill.